afford it for what you think you can't afford it, it's already paid for, you can go. If you want to contribute to it, you just can put your money in the box at any time between now and May and just put on their general fund, and that's what we're using to cover that cost. So if you want to help pay for it, that's great. Put your money in there. If you don't have for that, don't worry about it. Come to the revival. We want everyone to be there. We invite your friends. We want you to invite your family, and all of that is paid for. So please, please come. Danny is a great preacher. I love to hear him preach. I love to hear him teach. And I've told him that we like when people tell us stuff we don't like to hear. So feel complete freedom to let us have whatever it is he wants to tell us. And we are up for it. So I am looking forward to that. All right. We are going to finish the series on Daniel. This is going to be the last one that I'm going to do. I actually had a lot more of them planned, but I just want to stop here with this section of it. So that's what we're going to do. But I just want to quickly go through what we've looked at so far. And so the first episode we looked at was the swept away. And that's where we talked about how Daniel was ensconced up in a religious enclave of the world, which is Jerusalem. It was up kind of in the mountains, and it's kind of just a small city and kind of out of everyone's sight. And it's just this religious hotbed of religious thought and discussion and ritual, and that's where Daniel lived. But then Babylon came in and swept them away. It took away their young men. It took away the parts of the temple, the artifacts of the temple, and took them and put them into their museum, so to speak, and took all these bright, intellectual, intelligent young men and put them into the king's service and put them into that Babylon's university to train them to serve the king. And what looked like was going to last forever. I mean, they thought they were living the reign of God, the kingdom of God, and it would last forever. That was the promises, the sure mercies of David. This idea that their kingdom would last forever. All of a sudden, in very, very short amount of time, the siege lasted almost no time at all. Everything had been just wiped away. And within a few years, it was going to be further sieges until there was nothing left at all. It was all gone. And he found himself then, and the second we looked at was called culture shock, and that's where Daniel finds himself in a culture unlike any he had ever imagined possible. If you could, from religious experience, where everything about life is centered around the temple and serving a monotheistic, invisible God, and with laws and rules and belief systems and rituals that are established upon very sound monotheistic logic, and being taken from that and plunged headlong into a polytheistic, basically humanistic and naturalistic environment where everything is centered around the sensual and centered around the deification of humanity and humanism and all of these things. It's just a tremendous thing that he got put into. And everything from the architecture to the technology to the cultural permissiveness of Babylon. Babylon was the exact opposite of everything Daniel knew. And then the third one we looked at was identity crisis. And this is where we talked about how that Babylon had a well-planned assimilation strategy that consisted of systematically stripping Daniel of his identity. And it was simply encapsulated in taking away his name. So he came in being called Daniel, which we saw means God is my judge. And when he got there, they stripped that from him. They took that name away and they called him Belteshazzar, which literally means protect the king, or if we're going to do it idiomatically as they would have done it, or as a proper translation, the closest terminology we would have is God save the king. And so they took it, God is my judge, and that was Daniel's identity. That was how he self-conceptualized to God is my God save the king. This is what Daniel's life was meant to be about. This is what they were imposing on him. You're no longer going to worry about what God thinks. You're going to worry about what's best for the king of Babylon. That's your job, that's your life, and that's your identity. And that was that was what Babylon did. So now we're at one, and today I want to talk, and I've called this one Standing Tall. And this is where we see what's going to happen going forward. This is the deciding moment, really, in Daniel's life, right here, as we get to this. So we'll look at the text, and it's the end of the text that we read at the very beginning. We'll read through these few passages, few sentences again to establish what it is we're looking at and talking about. But I want you to notice how up to now, Daniel has been acted upon throughout the story to this point. He didn't have any choice in any matter. Babylon came in. We don't have any record of Daniel having any resistance to this or having put up any resistance to the conquest and the siege. And he's hauled away and he's marched down the main thoroughfare of Babylon, and he's introduced into the culture and religious culture and political culture of Babylon. And in all these things we've seen till now, Daniel is merely a pawn being acted upon. And it appears that Babylon's might is insuperable. It is unconquerable. It seems like nobody can stand up to this society and to this intellectual and political system that's in place, to where they will take somebody out of culture that is millennia old and can strip them down to bare bones, to a blank canvas, and then write on them their values at will. That's what it looks like up till now. And Babylon would not be doing this if the marketplace had not shown it to be successful. Daniel was not the first person to undergo this assimilation program. He was not the first person to undergo this. Babylon had a long history of doing this. This was their modus of operandi. This was the way they operated. They went into places, and the first thing they would do is find the intellectuals, the intelligent people of society, the ones that can contribute to their society, and would take them as, but they wouldn't have them chained up with chains. They would strip their identity, they would brainwash them, and turn them into Chaldeans, so that they were thinking like Babylonians, living like Babylonians, and pursuing the best interest of the Babylonians. And it takes a lot of doing to accomplish that. And Babylon obviously was very good at that. So up till now, Daniel has been clearly acted on. And now let's see what happens. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Then said Daniel, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar, the prince of the eunuchs, took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. All right, first, pulse. Today, the word pulse is a legume. That means a bean, basically. So if you're speaking of pulse in the modern sense, you're talking about chickpeas, lentils, peanuts, tamarind seeds, soybeans. This is what would be called pulse. It's still called that today, even though most people, if you're not a farmer or involved in it, you may not know that. But I don't think that's exactly what is meant by the translation that we have here in the Scriptures. I think it's referring to everything that is grown from seed. So it's basically, Daniel is saying he wants a vegetable-based diet. He doesn't want going to be a vegetarian diet. And so that's what I believe is what he is saying when it says he gave him pulse. It's not that he was only eating bean soup, but that he was eating things grown from seeds. And I think that's what that is how that is to be understood. Some have commented and speculated whether or not the problem that Daniel had here was that they were giving him meat that Jews shouldn't eat. So like pork meat or camel meat, other meats like maybe that Jews are by law weren't supposed to eat. That the real dispute that Daniel's saying, I don't want to eat pork meat because that's against the law of God. And so that but I don't think that's what happened here. Although that could be part of it, and Babylonians ate meats that Jews would have issue with, but I don't think that's a problem because he had a problem with the meat and with the and Jewish religion has no problem with wine, right? That's a think of someone drinking wine as American Christians, and it's like, well, that's wicked. It's a whole discussion for another time, but that isn't what we find in the Old Testament. That's not a Jewish view. Jews drink wine, so I don't think the issue is merely that they wanted to offer him pork, say, instead of beef or lamb. And if they had been lamb eaters, then there'd be no problem. I think that is not regarding what's really going on here fundamentally. Okay? So I don't think that is the case at all. So I want to look at what I think is actually the case and what I think happened here and how I see this to be the turning of the entire book. And if you look at the book, and we're not going to proceed further in this series at the moment, but if you'll take and you'll read through the book of Daniel, I think you'll find that right here, Daniel changes from being someone whose history is acting on, someone who becomes an actor in history. A complete transformation in how he's perceived. Now, it could be that Daniel has always been this person, and here is where he comes out, right? Here is where he shows himself to everyone else, who Daniel and shows that his identity has not been stripped and that he maintains his convictions, he maintains his autonomy and individuality. But it's an amazing thing that happens right here, and this is how it happens. It doesn't seem like it portends to great, to great accomplishment. You don't look at this and think, well, this is the turning point in life. They refused a plate of meat. Now that made a difference in their life. It doesn't look like a big thing. But when we look at, if we take the book of Daniel and we look at it in its totality as a literary piece, we look at, this is obviously where the tide turned. And Daniel was no longer this leaf being swept away on a river and plunged into a completely unknown environment and washed up and wrung out like laundry and written a new slate on him. All of this changed right here. So what happened here? Well, the first thing I want you to notice that Daniel does, that we can learn from also, is that Daniel demarcates a boundary. Babylon's assimilation program was, you have no rights. We own you. You don't have a right to what you eat, to what you wear, to what you speak. You don't even have a right to the name by which you're called. We're going to call you what we want. We're going to name you what you want. You're going to eat what we give you. You're going to drink what we give you. You're going to wear what we give you. You're going to study what we teach you. You're going to speak what we tell you to speak. And you're going to think the way we tell you to think. And it was apparently quite a successful strategy. And Daniel stands up and he says, I am drawing a line here. I am drawing a line between living in Babylon and all it entails, and Babylon living in me. And there's going to be a line between these two things, and there's nothing you can do about this. the line that Christianity must draw. We've been very bad at drawing this line on both sides of that spectrum. You have the Christians who say, we're drawing that line, and we're not going to dress like the world, and we're not going to talk like the world, and we're not going to drive like the world, and we're not going to farm like the world. And so then they're walking around, and they look like they came out of, I don't even know if it looks like they came out of, I'm not even sure if those clothes are even historical. To me, a lot of times it looks like that movie, The Village, where, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, The Village. I really love that movie. You got these people, and they live out in this little village, and it looks like they're living in, like, when I first watched it, it's like they're living back in the 1700s. But I'm listening, I'm watching, thinking, this is the stupidest movie I've ever seen, because there's no way they spoke like that in the 1700s. I've done enough reading. That's not 1700. Bouquet will turn to find out they're not in the 1700s. It was a brilliant piece of writing there to write it that way, where if you read enough and you knew of that time, you'd know, well, none of this is making sense. A lot of these Christians that want to go back into time and the good old days, they're not making any sense. Right? They're not living in a real historical life, right? It's like I used to live in Michigan, and in Michigan, there's Amish, then there's a lot around there. And when you go to the Amish, you go into their house, step back 100 or 200 years into time. But when you go into their barn, no. Their barn is completely modern, because they're not allowed to sell their milk and their cheese unless it's processed with modern equipment. And so they found some loophole in their theology that allows the barn to be modern. The cows can live in the 21st century, but the people cannot. And so you have that extreme where it's like, we're not going to have anything to do with the world, so we're going to study the science of the world. That's all devil science. Not going to take any courses in biology, take any courses in geology, none of these things, because it's all humanistic and it's of the devil, and we're just going to have Christian education. Well, Christian education isn't doing too well. It is not doing very well. And then the other side of it, it's like, well, we're just going to be relevant, and we're going to embrace the world and everything. We're going to talk like them and think like them and eat like them. No difference between Christians and non-Christians. What's the point? Daniel, he drew a line. He drew a line and said, there are things that I am willing to do, and there are things I'm not willing to do. I am willing to interact in Babylon. But just like Babylon symbolically stripped him of his name, he symbolically said, I will be in Babylon, but none of it's going to be in me. And I'm going to symbolize that by saying, I won't eat your food. I don't think that the food itself is really the issue here. I think that it is the symbolical stand, just like the name of Daniel wasn't the issue here. This was a symbolic point they were making, saying, we are going to strip your identity away by taking away your name. And he says, that's fine. I will be in Babylon. Babylon is not going to be in me. And so that's the boundary he did. When you look at Daniel, you would think, well, Daniel should have resisted, right? He should have just dug his heels in, clawed and kicked, and he should have thrown himself on the ground and said, I'm not going to Babylon, and I'm not going to be a part of this, and I'm not going to learn your language, and I refuse to wear clothes, and I refuse to be a part of your university. I refuse. It's not at all. He applied himself. He graduated with honors at the top of his class. Better than everybody else. He was the valedictorian of his class. Right at the top. So he took it very. He learned the language. He learned the science. He learned the technology. He wore the clothes. He was called by that name, Belteshazzar. Not often. Interestingly, when you read the book of Daniel, it's not the book of Belteshazzar. That's right. But that's what they called him, and that's what he answered to later in the book, often. He did all of these things. He didn't feel that he had to resist every step and in every turn. or that he had to throw out what he might gain good for just to make a point that I won't have anything to do with you. I think Christians are too often doing this. I know they do it when it comes to the sciences. It's like anything that smacks of being science can no longer be accepted by Christianity. And we have views, quote-unquote scientific views, that are simply absurd in churches. I'm sorry, but it's true. There's a book written by the same man from whom I got a lot of these ideas, John Lennox, and the book is called 7 Days That Divide the World. I would strongly encourage you to read that book. Tremendous book by Dr. John Lennox, That Divide the World. And in it, he lays out an analogy. And the analogy is, there was a time when all Christians, dogmatically, in other words, doctrinally, believed that the earth stood still. Because the Bible talks about the earth standing still. And the sun moved around the earth. Geocentric. Now this wasn't odd to Christians. This was everybody thought this way. It was an obvious thing to think. It wasn't foolish or stupid. It wasn't flat. This was actually made a lot of sense intuitively. All people believed. Copernicus and others started realizing, hey, there are things that don't make sense in this model. And Copernicus, heliocentric model, that the earth does not stand still, that it moves. Galileo picked up on that, and you can read all of that. But anyway, Christians, for a time after that, after science had already realized, yes, this is incorrect, maintained the geocentric and firm earth model for quite a while afterwards. Because the Bible says it. Now, it doesn't say it. It's misinterpreted, obviously. But that's how they were. And it's because nothing can be accepted that's scientific. Well, that's just a very poor position. That wasn't Daniel's position. So he knew how to strike this balance. Now, this is incredible. Remember, we're not talking about a 30-year-old man or a 40-year-old man or even a 20-year-old man. We're probably talking about a 12 or 13-year-old at this time who has the, and this is why he was picked. I mean, stupid. Babylon to Jerusalem and looks, those are the smart ones, and they knew what they were talking about. He was a smart one. So Daniel strikes this balance in which he said, I am going to squeeze everything I can out of Babylon, but they're not going to squeeze anything out of me. I am going to take for all they have, but they won't get a penny from me. Now that was brilliant. And because of the education they gave him, and he wasn't the only one to do this either. Moses did the same thing. Yeah, that's right. Moses is in Egypt, and he took all the training of Egypt, it says, all the knowledge of Egypt. He was trained in all their ways, and he used it. Moses didn't pop out of the wilderness being a great leader. Right. Moses came out of Egyptian learning to the wilderness to develop spiritual understanding and combine these things and became a great leader. That's right. And they're not the only ones either. You go through the scriptures, you're going to find a great number of these people who have gone through the world, what the world has to offer, have squeezed whatever they can from that lemon and combined that with a balance of spirituality. So Daniel struck a balance also between fitting in and standing out. Now that's hard to do. Most of us err to one side or the other. Either we're completely can't fit in anywhere and have no relevancy whatsoever, or completely capitulated and compromised in our testimony, and nobody would ever pick us out. We could never be convicted of being Christians in a court of law, ever. It's like one or the other for many of us. And we need to look at what Daniel did and how he was able to fit in where he needed to fit in and stand out where he needed to stand out. And really what we could say is that the balance that he struck was between fitting in and standing firm, would be the best way of putting that probably. And then the last thing Daniel did is that he towered over Babylon. And then he struck that balance there and made it where he could interact with the court and interact with the king and have influence over the entire kingdom. And at the same time, never compromise his convictions, no matter what. But he had to be able to delineate what those were. I mean, was his conviction that you can't wear Babylonian clothes? No. Was his conviction that you can't and give Babylonian wisdom to a Babylonian king? You can't go and work in a university and work in the science department? No, that was not his conviction. He figured out how to, very young, he figured out something. And that is that you can take and draw a line and say, there is a marked difference between me being in the world and the world being in me. And that's where I'm going to draw that line. So I can go and I can work in the world and study in the world and I can talk with the world and I can go in the world and not be in me. Jesus drew the same line. I can go and I can sit in the house of a publican next to a harlot and have a conversation with them without them. We can draw that line. Now that's a hard line to draw sometimes. It takes some real nuance, some real thinking. It's not easy. It's a whole lot easier to jump to an extreme, right? Which is why I think it's done. I think this extremism is not zeal as much as it is laziness. To a little hamlet somewhere, and no temptation, and no danger, and perfect village that we all just live in, and we walk around in white clothes and no shoes, singing, whatever it is you would sing in those cases. I hope nothing. I mean, my ideal is to sing anything. No, that would be just wonderful. Yes. But we don't live in that world. That's right. My dad actually had a couple employees back when he was framing apartments 50 years ago, I guess, maybe, something like that. Long time ago. Let's say 50. And they were sons of a group following a guy named James St. John, I believe it was his name. And it was a group that followed this guy who had convinced them that they could to, what's the name of that little country that speaks English in South America? Belize, thank you. They went down to Belize. Bought themselves, or rented, I think it was, this big parcel. They built that society. No sin, no temptation, no dangers, no world in their environment. And they lost all their kids to the world. It does not work. That world is to come. It's not here now. That is the kingdom of Christ, and it will only be established through the might and power of Jesus Christ, putting it on earth. It is not going to develop in some organic way out of Christians wishing for it or pretending it exists. We have to live in the world in which we are in. And we cannot retreat from it and hide from it and abscond ourselves from it and not be part of it. It is a sad state of affairs that it is not Christians who are now leading the charge in all matters of intellectual and creative pursuit. It used to be that way. The leading scientists were all believers. It is only a modern phenomenon that it is not that case, and it's not because unbelievers became so much more smart. Because Christians become convinced that somehow there's some incompatibility between the scientific view of the world and the spiritual view of the world. We're going to talk about that later on in a different series. But it's not true. It is not incompatible. And it doesn't even matter if it were. We live in the world. And we can't pretend we don't. It's not a winning strategy. So it's going to require you shaking off the laziness of thought, the laziness of not wanting to think it through and act properly. And you're going to have to say, I live in the world and I need to do it successfully. And I can. And you're going to have to make some boundaries, and you have to be real smart as to where those lines are drawn in life. You can't just start whacking off things and say, this is my little territory, and no one's coming in. It doesn't work that way. You're going to have to be real smart. And Daniel was real smart about it. He said, okay, I'll do what you want, but let's do this. I'm not going to eat your food. And the prince of the eunuchs says, yeah, but when they see that you're all skinny and malnutritioned, then they're going to be off with my head. So Daniel says, well, you like science? Let's do an empirical experiment. Give me 10 days to do it my way. In 10 days, doing it my way makes no difference to you. I says, that sounds good. And in 10 days, compared them, and they looked at Daniel's face. Not that Daniel, this Daniel. They looked at Daniel. And it was as fat as the other Daniel. Oh, that's wrong. Don't say that. No, they looked at Daniel. There was no discernible difference. And they're like, eat whatever you want then. And Daniel scored. Because I can draw. It may make no difference to them, a world of difference to me. I don't have to inflict injury or damage on the world around me to be victorious. Christians need to understand that. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. For me to win as a Christian doesn't mean I have to humiliate people around me. Or they can win and I can win. So this takes some real thinking about making these lines and drawing out these parameters and saying, this is my life and this is my public life. This is my private right and this is my public life, and I can draw those lines, and that's going to take some real thinking to do that. And then you're going to take and carefully balance your life along that line and get that balance right. And if you can do that, then you'll be like Daniel, and you'll over Babylon. Comes out of all this way ahead. Time says smarter. 10 times else in the kingdom. Christians don't idiots of the world to be good Christians.
That's right.
Christians don't have to be overwhelmed by Babylon and turn into complete world humanistic, naturalistic thinkers. There are, even today, even though there aren't many as there should be, there are today great examples of this.
That's right.
I would encourage you to look up people like James Tour,
Yes.
the leading nanobiologist in the world. He makes these little nano machines where you can put like 5 of them on a human hair, on the width of a human hair. these little machines that he can steer and drive with a beam. Them. A committed Christian.
That's right.
When they invite him in to speak, and he preaches the gospel, when he gets done, he gets down on his knees and prays to Jesus, asking that he illuminate the eyes of everyone in the room for the gospel. Francis Collins,
That's right.
the leader of the Human Genome Project.
That's right.
John, one of the leading mathematicians in the world. These are all strong, devout, committed Christians working in the world of science. Working in the world of art, they're there too. Working in the world of business, they are there also. There should be more of them. And the reason there isn't is because too many Christians have got it in their head that the best way in Babylon is either to turn yourself over, just swallow it all up, or useless to everybody. And Daniel set out a better way.
That's right.
A way we should be following. In school, you should be trying to be the very best you can be there. We don't need Christian doctors, Christian geologists. We need the best ones to be Christians.
That's right.
I read the book of Daniel now in a very different way than I ever used to before. And like I say, there's a lot more of this we could talk about. It's an amazing thing, the journey Daniel did. But to me, this first movement of his life is the most impressive. It's where we see that even though it was a little twig on a mighty river, it was never that small.
That's right.
Babylon didn't, but they absorbed the poison pill that was going to destroy them.
That's right.
And he outlived Babylon, and he outlived a lot of other kingdoms that came along. And through the consistent point through all of that was standing firm and being a light. You can do that also. Well, that's all we have on Daniel. So I hope you'll think about it and have a great day.